And then you divvy up the limits in the different areas, and then you prioritize. Ladies and gentlemen, this is this is not an option, all right? This is what we have to do. Now, to cut to the quick, in the House of Representatives right now, there are about 85 people who see this the same way I do and want to do exactly the same thing, and in fact have proposed a budget that will balance the budget in 5 years. If you want to send me to join them, this is what I will do. I will be part of that group. And we need a few more. We need to get up to about 120, maybe 25. But 2 years ago, there were only 35 in this group. So in the last election, we went from 35 to 85. If we can make that kind of change again, ladies and gentlemen, we have brought our country back from the brink of collapse and have restored the United States of America. So that's the vision. It's not difficult. It's very simple, very straightforward, but it's simply, this is our task. Now I want to show you one more chart. And this is a chart that compares bottom line growth in personal income. It's a green line. I hope you can see that from where you are. And the top line, which is the growth in federal government spending. This chart too is 3.5 years old, and if we update it, the green chart will say, the green line will say that since 1970, median income or average income has grown by a total of 28%. We've lost 4% in the last 4 years. The federal government has grown by 300%, all right, since 1970, 42 years. The federal government has grown 10 times faster than personal income. Now, when I say that, it reminds me of something that I used to do when I was in my 20s, and I have a hunch some of you have done the same thing. When I was in my 20s, I used to love to, at the county fair, be part of the tractor pull. In fact, I had my tractor in it a couple of times. But back then, we used to have the tractor hooked up to a sled, and there would be some weight on the sled, and the tractor would be pulling the sled down the track, but then a lot of us would line up on the sidelines. And as the sled went by, we would step on, okay? Anybody else step on the sled? John stepped on the sled. Neil stepped on the sled. Gil stepped on the sled. A lot of you said, this was great fun, right? But what happened is people kept stepping on the sled. We would reach a point, okay? We'd reach a point where the tractor would spin out, didn't have the traction, didn't have the power combination of the two. We'd reach a point where that engine was done. Okay? We stopped the sled. That's exactly what's happening here. The federal government has grown in terms of regulations, in terms of spending. It's all overhead. It's all weight being added on the engine of the free enterprise. And free enterprise is a powerful engine. But you put enough weight on any engine and you are going to stop that sled. And that's what we have done in the United States of America. Let me be explicit. Up until about the mid-2000s, the federal spending consisted of about 18% of the gross domestic product. Ladies and gentlemen, today it's 24%. We can get along well. The engine can pull the sled at 18%. At 24%, you've got high unemployment, you've got anemic economic growth, you've got just as many people going on disability as are becoming employed. You have food stamps that expands, that multiplies like rabbits, and more. And so we've got too much weight on the sled, and so what the Congress has to do is start getting people, projects, whatever, to step off the sled. We have to get back to that 18%. So we can do what Australia is doing. In the last quarter, Australia's economy grew by over 5% annual basis. Our economy grew by less than 2% annual basis. What is Australia doing differently? They're doing three things. Number one, they've backed off on burdensome nonsense regulations. Number two, they control spending, not as well as they would like. But their debt to asset debt to GDP ratio is 22%. Ours is well over 100. Okay? They have done those two things. The third thing they have done is they have clamped down on fraud. And that is partly why, if you followed what I've been saying, we have to clamp down on fraud, and that includes, as Bob mentioned, that includes the Medicaid fraud that is rampant, including at the upper echelons of government. Let me give you the number. Medicaid fraud at the upper echelons of government is costing every taxpayer in this assembly $500 a year. And this too is money down a rabble. Okay? We don't get anything back. One estimate by the US government is $100 billion a year, money down a rabble. So if we're going to balance the budget, we have to cut $200 billion a year. We have to do that 5 years in a row. So we can meet half of our first year's quota just by clamping down on the fraud. Aren't cutting any programs, aren't raising anybody's taxes, which I'm not going to do anyway. But if we're going to get our house in order, clamping down on fraud has to be part of the picture. And unfortunately, much of the federal government is a wink and a nod as far as fraud goes. So ladies and gentlemen, this is our challenge. This is not difficult. This is not difficult. This is really very, very clear. What makes it murky, if we can call it that, is two things. Number one, it's the fact that in the national awareness, the matter of the big 800-pound gorilla is almost absent without leave. Presidential debates, which I love to watch. How often did you have this issue of the debt brought up in the presidential debates? John, it wasn't there, was it? Occasionally, it was mentioned in passing. Okay? That was it. You talk to the political pros, and I don't care which party they're in, what's the big issue? How many of them do you think say the debt is the issue? Ladies and gentlemen, they aren't there. You go to the coffee shop, all right? You go to McDonald's. You go to this new restaurant. Neil, what was the one we went to? Beano's?
Beantown.
What was it again?
Beantown.
Beantown. Wonderful place. Wonderful place. Ask people in Beantown. They're going to tell you what's the big issue. They're going to tell you more often than not, it's the runaway debt. You talk to college kids. You know what the big issue is for them? It's the runaway debt. The runaway debt is a huge national security issue because you can't have a good national defense without a strong economy. Okay? It's a huge issue for Medicare, Social Security, and veterans benefits. Okay? Are we going to be able to meet our commitments in those areas? Not if we don't solve this problem. You think Greece is meeting its commitments to its retirees? Yes, again. The real threat to those, okay, the real threat to all these things is the debt. I want to mention just one more thing, and then I want to ask for your questions and comments. Congressman Walz, of course, has been a champion of bringing home the bacon for veterans benefits, and I give him credit for that. But Congressman Walz is one of the biggest spenders in D.C. So there's an old proverb, something about straining at the gnat and swallowing the camel. Okay, you know what I'm talking about? That's what we're seeing. If we don't solve the debt problem, I don't care how good you are at securing veterans benefits. Okay, if we're in financial collapse, it's not going to happen. So this is the biggie. And the future of our country, more than anything else, hinges on this. I do have to add one footnote. I saw an update yesterday on how much Obamacare is going to cost us over 10 years. And it's interesting how this number keeps going up, doesn't it? Keeps going up. And this is the number put out by the research staff of the Republican Conference in Senate Republican Conference, Washington, D.C., based on Congressional Budget Office numbers. And keeps going up. The latest is $2.4 trillion of new debt. This isn't accounting for the new taxes, which Club for Growth says is $5.5 trillion over 10 years. but well over $2 trillion in additional debt. Okay, you look at the chart and you tell me, can we afford an additional $2 trillion of debt on top of where we're headed? Ladies and gentlemen, this is just absolute fantasy. So we have to change the process. We have to change the process, set the limits, the way the state government does. So I've dedicated my life to making that happen, and I'm going to do everything I can to bring that about. So those are my comments. I'd love to have any questions or suggestions from any of you. John, go ahead.
Why don't the congressmen wake up to the fact and get back to the Constitution? The last 50 years, since the Bilderberg come in, your chart went berserk after the first hit the last 50 years.
John, before I answer that, I'm going to qualify my answer, which I would be very unusual for me. But when you ask me the question why, I want you to know I'm just giving you my opinion, because I can't read the hearts of men. I know. But I clarify that because I concentrate on giving information. And that's why, for my purposes, I want to draw the distinction here. But I will give you what my opinion is. And that's going to involve a couple of things. And here I don't want to mention any names, but not that long ago, I was at a town hall meeting like this from a being held by a Republican congressman. I asked him, now this goes back some years, why don't you say anything about the debt and the deficit? And his answer was, because nobody cares. I think that perception is still there to some degree among our elected officials that nobody cares. I think that's part of it. Now keep in mind, I'm giving my opinion. Now let me add a second thing. A second thing is our elected officials have been doing this since at least 1944. That's where the chart starts. In other words, 67 years. That's how old I am.
The last 50 years have been quiet.
and the world hasn't collapsed yet. And so, you know, now you can say to me, that's totally irrational. Yeah, but why does it have to be rational? But I mean, in fact, that attitude is out there that, well, it hasn't collapsed yet, all right? But there's a rule in Alcoholics Anonymous, which is you aren't going to take the cure until you see the end of the road. And one of the things that we are going to want to do in our TV ad is we want to let the public see, if they haven't seen it already, folks, you're looking at the end of the road. All right? We are looking at the end of the road, so we have to change. Another reason, last thing I'm going to mention, if politics is your game, and it's really not mine, but if politics is your game, you get votes by telling people they're going to give them something, and you don't lose votes if you don't have the revenue to do it. So there are incentives built in to this corrupt system. Buy votes. And I want you to know it parades every once in a while, and of course I walk along the curb if I can. Well, every once in a while somebody asks me, well, Quist, what are you going to do for me? Right? I want you to know my answer is always the same. I'm going to give you a country where you're free. And if that's not good enough, support somebody else. And it's interesting, their response is always, well, that makes sense.
How many people know about the Bilderberg?
Well, not that many.